They spent billions of dollars trying to sway away the Muslim population from political Islam towards, the corrupt Western civilization. Capitalism itself is the ideology that normalized colonialism. Hundreds and millions of people were killed. The indigenous populations were completely wiped off the face of the earth. It was a man-made famine in which 5 million people died. An American army unit, it actually goes into an Iraqi family's home. They kill the family, they rape the girl, and they actually douse those bodies with petrol and then burn them.
It requires someone to be subjugated. It requires someone to be oppressed. What wasn't filmed, what won't ever be shown to future generations.
The strength of a system is judged by how the weakest is treated. When the French government itself disrespected Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam by displaying disrespectful caricatures on government buildings, not a single Muslim government in these 56 Muslim countries responded. Not a single one. Can you imagine? I mean, Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and Isa alayhi salatu wasalam being the people that stand against us, as witnesses that this was my daughter, she was being oppressed in such and such way, and the Muslim Ummah that was 2 billion strong did not come to her aid, did not rescue her. Our rulers cannot even take her name. Allah has delivered us to liberate mankind from the slavery of man to the worship of one Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, from the narrowness of this world to the vastness of the akhir.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Dear brothers and sisters, welcome back to our third episode on Ummah's Revival. Alhamdulillah, we're glad to see that you guys are enjoying the videos and the content that we're producing. And today we have a very exciting episode. For the last few months, we have seen an uproar and a revival to Aafia Siddiqui's case. This case has been a long case that the Ummah has endured for many, many years. And inshallah, we want to go into what happened to Aafia Siddiqui, who she was, and what is the root cause of not just her case, but all the other cases of the Muslim Ummah that the Muslim activists are suffering from. So today with us, we have Dr. Akmal, who is an Islamic intellectual. He is someone who is passionate about Islamic dawah, about Islamic history, about Islamic politics, and he is someone who is working to revive the Islamic Ummah as we are on this channel. So inshallah, we'll be here with Dr. Akmal, and he'll be sharing some of his expertise on this case and some of his background on this case of Aafia Siddiqui. And then also we'll dive into kind of what role do the Muslim nations, specifically Pakistan, but even at large, right, the other Muslim nations have a role to play into this. So that's kind of an overview, sir, today. Assalamu alaikum, Dr. Akmal. How are you?
Wa alaikum assalam. Alhamdulillah. Alhamdulillah. What about yourself?
Alhamdulillah. We're just glad to be in your company. Alhamdulillah. And also we have joined with us our brother Zaki, who is one of our co-hosts on this channel, who helped launch this channel as well. So Zaki, I think this is your first time on the YouTube video, so just go ahead and introduce yourself, kind of the work that you're involved in, and then we can kick it off from there.
Sure. Assalamu alaikum, everybody. My name is Zaki. I'm based out of the United States. I was born and raised here. I didn't grow up with much of a, I would say, journey or much of a desire for Islam. But as I got older, I gained more desire for Islam. I started learning my religion. I learned about our obligations as Muslims. I studied Quran. I studied Hadith. I went to a few madrasas and studied Islam academically as well, and also on a political level. And alhamdulillah, I make it my life's work to go and work with my community. I'm involved in my local masajids, and I work to revive the Islamic way of life.
Jazakallah khair with Zaki. All right, so to get the conversation kind of started, Dr. Akmal, I think right before the president election was happening, the president gets to pardon, whoever he wants right here in the United States. And there was a very strong push to get the pardon for Aafia Siddiqui. And I saw, from the Muslim community that I was involved in, and maybe Zaki can share the same thing, is that many Muslims don't even know who she was at this point, right? This was a case that was very popular many, many years ago, and maybe it's a failure of the Ummah that we have forgotten about Aafia Siddiqui and what happened to her. So, with the youth that I was interacting with, people that are from the age of 20 to 30, That was a moment of interaction and discussion with them to share, who Aafia Siddiqui was. Maybe this is just a reality outside of Pakistan, but kind of share your experience, interacting with the people. What has the momentum been with her case? And then we can kind of dive into who she was and her background as well.
Yes, I mean, actually, I would like to go back a little bit before we introduce Dr. Aafia herself, because it's important to understand the ordeal she's going through is related with a broader policy, or I would say, what the international order itself is seeing with respect to the Ummah, how it faces or how it places itself with respect to the Islamic Ummah itself. See, I mean, the story starts from all the way back to 1990 when Soviet Union was kind of, I would say it faced its own demise. And right after that, you can see a big shift within Hollywood and within I would say, the policymakers themselves. You would see before 1990, primarily the enemy would be the socialist, the communist, I mean, whether it is the Rocky movies or it is the James Bond movies, they're always the villain, always the bad guy is the communist. And during the 1990s and afterward, you would see movies popping up in which the Muslim was the bad guy. It was Executive Decisions. Again, it's a very old movie. Sorry for that. True Lies, Siege. These were the movies where kind of they were building the background that, okay, the West is going to be facing a challenge from the Muslim Ummah or the Muslim population in large, whether it is the Muslim population that is living in the West or it is the Muslims from other places themselves. And you can see a certain type of, whether it is emotional, cultural, or even intellectual type of background was being built during the 1990s, that, okay, we're having an emerging threat that is appearing upon the horizon. And if we don't deal with it right away, we might have problems. So after the demise of socialism, the intellectual challenge was perceived to be Islam. Okay, this is something very important, that the West itself is seeing the political Islam, the ability of Islam to give solutions in general to the people themselves, whether it is Muslims or non-Muslims, whether it is the economic problems, social problems, international issues, foreign policy, education, whatsoever. Because, I mean, again, Muslims have a very rich history, almost 1,300, 1,200 years of ruling a very large swath of land, diverse people, diverse backgrounds, different type of people, irrespective of their religion, irrespective of their ethnicities. Even when Muslims are ruling within, whether it is Spain, whether it is India, whether it is the Eastern Europe areas, whatsoever, large non-Muslim populations, and we were very successful. India, when we were ruling India itself, India became the largest economy of the world. It was producing 27% of the GDP of the world, while Muslims were a minority in the India. So that's
But it was under Islamic rule.
Exactly. Under the Muslim rule, under the Islamic rule itself, India itself became the golden sparrow for, all of the salivating colonial powers, whether it's France, Portugal, or England. So having said this ideological schism or this ideological confrontation that was being foreseen by the West, it kind of culminated, or you can say like, it came to the fore after the 9/11 2001 incident. And that's when the US and the West thought so that they had to take the political Islam head on. And especially with respect to Trump. The Trump itself, or Trump, you can see him again and again repeating a phrase. He's saying that, okay, people are trying to be political correct, and they always talk about the extremist jihadists and blah, blah, blah. But he wants to say, okay, their challenge is with political Islam. And unless until political Islam is not crushed or this way or that way, the West itself will not be at peace. From this background, once they have declared political Islam to be the enemy, once they have declared anybody that would be aspiring to have some kind of a solution that would bring Islam versus capitalism to the forefront, would be seen as an enemy to the Western civilization, to the Western hegemony over the world itself, right? And that's where I would say the educated people of the Muslim world themselves, they were kind of targeted. during the Obama years, the first Obama period, in which Hillary Clinton was the Secretary of State, and even before that, they coined a term calling it a campaign for hearts and minds of the Muslim world. They spent billions of dollars trying to sway away the Muslim population from political Islam towards, the corrupt Western civilization. Billions of dollars. And in that situation, they wanted to create a certain type of barrier or certain type of, I would say, deterrence, where a person like Dr. Aafia Siddiqui, who is an MIT graduate, has a PhD in neurosciences, she could be a very huge poster girl for political Islam itself. That, okay, such an educated person with such a rich background, and she is aspiring and she is advocating for political Islam. Now, this is the whole issue. This is the whole issue that basically had to be dealt with. That any person that would have such a rich background from the Western culture itself, and that person rejecting the Western culture and actually advocating some kind of a position for political Islam, is going to dismantle everything that has been done with billions of dollars being spent, with the campaign of hearts and minds, State Department, everything else being done through whether it is the American government or the Western governments of England, France, and other European countries. So that's what was happening with Dr. Aafia.
Dr. Akmal, if I can ask a quick clarifying question. You mentioned intellectual Islam, right? Or to be able to see a political Islam. What do you mean by that? I mean, I know we understand that term here, but I think this term is not as widely understood by the Muslim masses. And you see people like Aafia Siddiqui and others, present Islam in this ideological way, in this holistic way. And you see it combating other ideologies. And you mentioned, right, the capitalist ideology was combating the communism or the socialistic ideology at that time. And it's starting to now see Islam as an ideology again, right, which was previously destroyed. So what do you mean by that, if you can expand a little bit?
See, capitalism itself is basically built upon an ideology or built on a creed, an aqidah, that is the separation of church and state, that the religion, or I would say obedience to God, has to be kept away from policy making, from public sphere, from governing the people themselves. This is the basic idea. I mean, it's kind of like made to appear appealing, that keeping religion away. No, it's not keeping religion away. It's about keeping God away from people's lives. This is the basic idea. This is what secularism is built upon. This is the basic creed of capitalism, that we need to keep God away from decision making. And how are decisions made? They leave it to basically, in general, the majority of people, whatever they would decide. And if the majority decides something to be in their benefit, then that is in the benefit of the people. Now, the God has to be kept outside. If God says something is bad, you don't listen to it. You only listen to what your person as a person himself says, that, okay, this is what I want. And if the majority of the people say that, this is what the society is going to decide upon. This is capitalism. So freedom of ownership, this is basically saying that everything, anything, whatever somebody desires to own, has the commitment, has the ability to own it, they're allowed to own it. It does not make any difference if that is a public property. It does not make any difference if that is going to cause people to suffer. It's going to cause people, actually, for societies to disintegrate. It does not make much of a difference, because a person is allowed to own whatever he wants to own, right? That's why this aspect of this ideology itself is quite dominant, and that's why it's called capitalism. Capitalism itself is the ideology that normalized colonialism. Hundreds and millions, let this sink in, hundreds and millions of people were killed in Australia, South America, North America, to make way for the Western colonialists. The indigenous populations were completely wiped off the face of the earth. Millions of people were killed, butchered, whether it is Africa or Asia. Latest, 1943, you can actually Google it up, the famine of Bengal. Up to 5 million people died because Churchill the prime minister in England, he decided that all of the grains and food stuff need to be moved away from the border areas because the Japanese armies were coming in. It was a man-made famine in which 5 million people died. The colonialists, the easiest way to understand what a colonial power is, and any other government or any other structure itself, whenever you have a two-tiered system where the ruled is governed by a separate set of laws, and the ruler is governed or different set of laws is applied to them, like America and Japan. There are tens of thousands of American soldiers in Japan, in Okinawa, in military bases, or in South Korea, or in Germany. It is not the German law that governs the American soldiers there. It is not the South Korean law or the Japanese law that governs them. Even if for heinous crimes like murder or rape, the law of the land is not applied to the American soldiers present on the ground.
Wow, I didn't know that. That's shocking.
Yes, they would be only ruled, or they would be only judged as per an agreement between the two countries, the United States, and in that case, whoever the host country is. Like when the U.S. Army was in Iraq or the U.S. Army was in Afghanistan, they were not governed by the Iraqi constitution. They were not governed by the Afghani constitution. The very constitution that the U.S. helped those regimes develop and design, and to declare that they are the most modern or most progressed or the best constitution within the Muslim world whatsoever. But those constitutions were not applicable to the U.S. soldiers in those lands. And there's a very famous case in which an American army unit, it actually goes into an Iraqi family's home. They kill the family. They rape the girl. There's a small minor girl. I don't remember exactly her age. I think so she was like 14 years old or something like that. And they actually douse those bodies with petrol and then burn them. And this was not reported by any Iraqi. It was reported back. It was such a horrible act, that it was reported by a fellow soldier to his superiors that this is what my comrades have done. Now check up what type of punishment did they get. Imagine a person, because I want to relate it with Dr. Afia's case and what type of punishment she got. The accusation that, okay, she snatched a rifle, she fired at a soldier, she injured a soldier. These were the accusations that were labeled upon her or she faced. And because of which she got 86 years of detention. 86 years, 84 years. And just check, what was the punishment that those people that were responsible for killing 5 Iraqi Muslims, raping a girl, burning her and the whole family, the bodies themselves, and coming back joyously drunk and having no remorse at all.
Dr. Akmal, just a quick point, I think, to kind of reiterate what you're saying. I think a lot of people, they miss this concept when they think about capitalism, think about colonialism. They forget that it's an ideology. And in order for that ideology to extend beyond its borders, and in order to impose itself, to subjugate itself, there needs to be someone. It requires someone to be subjugated. It requires someone to be oppressed. And I think oftentimes, like you mentioned the story in Iraq, and we see now in the past year what happened in Gaza. We see the stories, we see the pictures, we see the videos, the atrocities that are being committed. It begs the question of what happened during the war on terror. What happened in Iraq? What happened in Afghanistan? What wasn't filmed? What won't ever be shown to future generations? And I think this goes to show the point that for people who actively participate in capitalism, in colonialism, in democracy, in these ideologies that oppose Islam, what is the red herring for them? Like, what will wake these people up? Because we hear these stories. We hear the story of Dr. Aafia Siddiqui, and it seems like the Ummah is still asleep in a sense.
That's the whole idea, that's the whole idea. Because the West itself, it placed its own civilization and its own ideology at a higher pedestal, at a higher level. And they kind of considered themselves, or you can say, entitled themselves that they have the responsibility to culture and to civilize the rest of the savage world.
Yeah, it's a superiority complex.
I wouldn't call it complex itself. I mean, you can check it out. White man's burden. And this is a term, white man's burden, that it is their responsibility. That's why whether it was the French, whether it was the British, whether it was the Americans, they were roaming the world, all over the globe itself, going every place, planting their flag and saying, I claim it in the name of the king or the queen or whatsoever. While people were living there, while they had governments, they had their own systems, when they had their own ideologies, when they had their own economies and everything. And we have civilizations that are much, much, much more older than whatever the West have ever seen. Like if you look at the Chinese civilization or the Mesopotamian or the or the Egyptian or what. I mean, people have been living in these lands for thousands of years, right? Still, they are being considered as savages. Even recently, Mark Rubio, in his confirmation hearing, he kind of created some kind of an explanation for the Zionist regime in Israel, that what can they do when they're living next to savages? He declared a whole population as savages.
Yeah.
And he tried to build upon the imagery, usually the American populations are much more accustomed to, right? Who were the savages in the US? This is the type of imagery they want to portray. This is the type of, I would say, again, an opinion they're trying to project, because all of the Western movies, especially 1960s and 70s and whatever the cowboy movies that were made in Hollywood, they always showed savages as semi-naked people living in tents. The indigenous people of the Northern American plains, right?
Yeah.
And those people that they cannot speak, and they scalp people and they skin people, and they're doing so terrible things. They're savages. They were never looked at as being human beings, having their own civilization, having their own way of living. But they were looked at as, okay, this is a civilized person coming in with a nice coat and tie and dress. And on the other side, you have a semi-naked person with a feather in his head. And this is a savage. This is a civilized person. It was the civilized people that used atomic weapons upon the people in Japan. Mm-hmm. It was the civilized people in the Second World War when they killed in tens of thousands, up to actually more, in Dresden by aerial bombardment and usually using incendiary material to burn people alive. That's why when the Gaza campaign was going on, the Israeli government officials, they were claiming that their operations are more humane than any other Western powers' campaigns. You know what they were saying? They were saying that they were more humane than what America was doing in Iraq. They were claiming that they were more humane when compared with America and Afghanistan. And today they're saying, right, or Trump is saying, the special envoy to Middle East is saying that there's nothing left in Gaza. There's only rubble. Every standing building, if it's not completely demolished down to the ground, it's unsafe to live in. And they're saying the people that live there, they're savages. This is their worldview. This is how they look at it. This is how they look at, this is colonialism. They think so they're doing a favor to the humanity itself. They're going place to place, trying to civilize people. They're going from one continent to the other continent and trying to, bring people up to speed, make them progressive, make them, in their own images. This is their mission. This is what colonialism is. And because the local people themselves, local populations, they don't see the benefit. They're not able to understand the benefit. They're savages, again, barbarians. So they have to be coerced. They have to be forced. They have to be kind of like, one way or the other, whether it is through torture, whether it is through massacres, whether it is through famines and man-made famines and starvation, whether it is by looting their resources and stuff. They have to be forced to accept the Western civilization as the pinnacle of human civility or human endeavor itself. And if they don't do it, then they are termed as savages. So it's not something very old. As I said, few weeks ago, they use the same term, savages. And if you pick up again the sector of defense, He is reported to have publicly said, kill all Muslims. You have many American army generals on the record who consider the Muslims in general to be, okay, these people, they're backward, they're this thing, they're that thing. And until we don't subdue them, we don't crush them, we don't kill their will, they will keep on resisting. So that's the whole idea, and that's where Dr. Aafia comes in. And as I said, you asked about, okay, what's the difference between capitalism? Look, capitalism governs our economies in a particular way, right? Right now, even in the US itself, there's kind of a narrative being built, okay? People supported Trump to come into power itself, but now they're seeing that, okay, this is only an exclusive billionaire club that has come to rule now. Before, it was the 99% thinking that they're against 1%, but now it's the 99.99%, and they would be feeling the weight of that 0.001%. That are ruling and making decisions in order to enhance, in order to protect, in order to increase their own wealth. The concentration of wealth is going to even accelerate more. The common people themselves, the middle class families that are having hard time just getting their groceries. While on the other side, Trump, he said that, okay, things are going to get expensive, but in the longer run, things are going to be okay. So he's accepting things are going to become difficult for the common American, but at the same time, he's saying that, okay, it's going to be in the benefit of some people, but we have to wait for it. So now, just to allow me to give a contrast between capitalism and Islam. Islam has a special type of ownership. It's called public ownership, malkiyat amma. Okay, in Islam, disallows, it forbids anything that a society depends upon. For its cohesion, its operation itself. If a society depends upon it, it cannot be owned. People cannot own waterways, cannot own highways. People cannot own anything. These are called public properties. Anything that could have that is actually an uncounted resource. It's not going to dry out. It's not going to finish off. Mineral resources, these are public properties. So when it comes to petroleum products, when it comes down to energy resources, these are public properties. These are supposed to be, I would say, industries whose benefit and profits are to be spent upon the people in general. Now look at US, look at the oil industry. Whether it's the Exxon Mobil, you can look it up. You can see how many hundreds of billions of dollars they earn per quarter. While we face a problem of filling up our own gas tanks, right, at $4 a gallon or something, you have Exxon Mobil or at the same time BP Amoco or all of the other petroleum companies raking in hundreds of billions of dollars per quarter. Their profits are more than the economies of most of the countries of the world. Their profits, not only revenues. They're getting crazy rich. That's why when these elections, especially in the last, I would say, around about since 2016 or so, it has been a competition between two wealthy groups, the tech companies and the oil companies. The oil companies have been behind Trump. The tech companies had been behind the Democrats. Now, in this election itself, kind of you can say this pattern was broken. When Elon Musk bought over Twitter and then kind of made his way into the tech industry. And that's where you see that, okay, even Mike Zuckerberg and all of those people, then they started coming behind Trump, and Trump has been allowed back onto Facebook and other social media platforms. And along with the oil industries, the tech industries are now standing behind Trump as well.
Right.
So it was the rich against the rich. And that's why tens of billions of dollars are spent in US elections. Islam comes in, it gives a complete different perspective about ownership. Yes, it allows private ownership. People are allowed to own a lot of different type of things. They can own factories, they can own luxury goods, they can own, swaths of lands, they can cultivate. But at the same time, Islam forbids certain type of ownership to exist in private hands. Okay, it's a very natural response. It's a very natural type of solution. That there are properties that are personal in nature, and there are properties that are public in nature. And whatever has a public nature cannot be held in private property or as in private capacity. And then the other thing comes in, it's about interest, right? I'm not sure if there's even, except for very few Muslims that do not take interest or try to avoid interest, there's not a single person in the US that is not suffering from interest, whether it is because of home loans, car loans, every other appliances that are being bought on loans, credit card loans, right? Trillions of dollars. Right now in the US itself, the credit card loan is in excess of $1 trillion. And credit card loans themselves, the interest rate on them is astronomical, right?
25
And
plus
Islam
percent.
says, Islam forbids interest. Islam says you're allowed to earn profit on commodities. You're allowed to earn profit upon your service, but you're not allowed to earn profit upon capital. Now, let that sink in. For people that are almost like, living, I would say, or drowning, should not be even living, drowning under debt. They don't know what would happen if their next paycheck does not come in. And Islam gives a solution, right? Now, that's where the problem comes in, because Islam is giving a solution. Islam is giving a solution to collective wisdom, saying, okay, when people get together and they decide what is good for them, that is good for them. Islam says, no, Allah knows. He is the creator. He is the all knowledgeable. He is the most wise with infinite wisdom. When He tells you something is good for you, that is truly good. And when He says something is bad for you, that is truly bad. Secularism, capitalism is built upon separating God from our lives. This is unnatural. This is something that human beings, as beings, we subscribe to. We submit ourselves to the Almighty, right? Knowing that He has infinite knowledge and infinite wisdom. That if He tells me something, I understand, even if I'm not able to comprehend exactly how, but I understand whatever He tells me is good. This is what Islam is. This is what Islam calls for. This is why Islam has the name Islam, right? That we submit to the Almighty, the All-Knowing, the All-Powerful, right? That's why we're Muslim, the one that submits. So on one side, you have submission to Allah, submission to God, and the other side, you have like, okay, no, submit to yourself, submit to your own desires, submit to your own vanity, submit to whatever deviant type of thing comes to your mind. These are the two civilizations that are clashing right now. So one side has a powerful state. Capitalism has a very powerful state. The other side has individuals like you guys and me and a lot of other Muslims that aspire, no, the only salvation for humanity is when we submit to the all-powerful creator who created everything and knows exactly what He has created, right? That's the clash that is right now happening. And that's where they want to vilify this idea that God knows best. You can look at this document. It was put out by RAND Corporation, the Civil Democratic Islam.
Yeah.
And it spells out exactly the make of the Muslim population. They divide it into 4 different categories. There are secular Muslims, modern Muslims, traditional Muslims, and radical Muslims. Now, they consider the radical Muslims to be the one that are aspiring for some kind of a political solution, political Islam. So they lumped all of the political Islam activists into the radical Islam type of category. They were saying that, okay, the Muslims, the traditional Muslims, who are the majority of the Muslims, they do not look favorably towards the secular Muslims, the ones that have rejected secular Muslims. Remember, the secular Muslim is the one that wants to remove God from public sphere. They don't want to obey God. They want to obey me. They want to obey themselves, right? So that's why they're secular. So in front of the Muslim eye, they're not credible. They're rejected. They're not accepted. Modern Muslims are that, okay, they kind of have the ability to articulate role of God into, the modern philosophies of modern state and modern nation states and modern governance, and with respect to democracy and trichotomy of power and devolution of power and all of these ideas. They're some way able to bring in Islam, bring in different evidences from Quran and Sunnah, and prove that, okay, this rule by sovereignty of humans is Islamic as well. That's why they're modern Muslims. The traditional Muslims are kind of like, they're still subscribing to the traditional books and have a traditional outlook and trying to link things with the traditional way, but they don't know, okay, what should an Islamic state look like? They don't know what a Islamic economy would look like. They don't know what an Islamic judicial setup would look like. They aspire, they love, they crave Islam, but most of the time they don't know. The radical Muslims, they have a plan. They have a very clear understanding. What does it mean to rule by Islam? What does it mean to have a state that is governed by Islam? They know what an economy within that state would look like. They would know what a judiciary would look like. They know what the social setup is going to be like. They know what the family is going to look like. They know what are going to be the roles of different genders. They know what the education is going to be. They know what is the role of the Muslim Ummah vis-a-vis the rest of the world itself with respect to foreign policy and everything. So they have a very clear understanding, a very clear vision, a very clear, I would say, model that they want to achieve. Now, what the Rand Corporation document says about within that civil democratic Islam says, okay, the struggle here is between the modern Muslims and the radical Muslims. Secularists are out. Muslims aren't going to accept them. And in order to win over, or not necessarily win over, what it claims that the modern Muslims need to be helped to win over the traditional Muslims. Okay, when this statement comes out, I think so any intelligent person is going to understand that maybe the two ideas are allowed to clash with each other, and the people can judge which idea is stronger. And the people would be allowed to subscribe to or adopt whatever idea is strong, with respect to its evidences, with respect to its, its construction, right? But no, they don't actually suggest that let's allow a debate between these two different spectrums. Let's allow the modern Muslim to place his ideas, his solutions, his understandings in front of the Muslims. Let's allow the people that have been labeled radical Muslims. I'm going to come back to this issue of labeling as well. The Muslims that have been labeled as radical Muslims, let's allow them to present their ideas. Let's allow them to present their solutions, their arguments, their evidences, how their conclusions have been constructed. And let's see if the people are going to accept it or not. I mean, that would have been a very democratic way of doing it, right? But no, they didn't want to do it this way. They said, no, we have to vilify the radical Muslims in the eyes of the general population. That's where, again, the Dr. Aafia thing comes in as well. That we need to vilify the radical Muslims in the eyes of the general Muslim population. How? Just spell it out. We need to show how brutal they are. We need to show that these beheadings and butchery and all of those type of things. And you can relate that, okay, then whatever has been happening in the Muslim world, it has an agenda behind it. So it's not the radical Muslims that are doing it, but somebody is doing it and then placing the blame upon the radical Muslims. So
part of their strategy, part of their game.
Exactly. That's, if you remember, again, old movie reference, when Rocky is facing a challenger from the Soviet Union, they show all of the people in a very robotic fashion, emotionless, detached. This is a person that has been built with almost like, an industrial understanding or industrial scale level. And then you have on the other side, Rocky Balboa, and basically he's training in a meat shop and different places, full with vigor, full with emotions, having all of these troubles with wife and family and trainer and these things. And then he just fights and then he wins because he has a greater heart. Now, what they were trying to show was that, okay, one society is heartless, just by projecting a person, right? A person in his team, that he's heartless, and at the end he concedes, man, this guy has a big heart. I cannot fight him. This is what's happening right now exactly. They're projecting Muslims, especially Muslims that have an ideological understanding of Islam, that these are people, again, as per the Rand Corporation documents instructions, right? As per their advice, as per their suggestions. These radical Muslims have to be shown they're backward. It has to be shown they're savages. It has to be shown they're ruthless and brutal. They are anti-women, are this thing. They are anti-minority. If they come in, they're going to do this, and this, and it's going to just create chaos in the world. They're not giving solutions. They are bringing in a recipe of disaster. They build their own characters. They build their own stage. I mean, when I say they, is the Western civilization, the Western hegemonic rulers, and their puppets within the Muslim world themselves. They build their own characters, they build their own stage, and they allow these characters and these stages to run rampant within the Muslim world. And then to claim, see what they did? See when they got hold of power in Iraq, what they're doing? See when they get hold of power in Pakistan, in Swat, or in the tribal areas, this is what they do. So these people, they are very backward. They're not calling them conservative. Oh, these are people that are living in the 7th century. They want to bring something from the 7th century and try to apply it in the 21st century. How can that be possible? Right? So this vilification itself against political Islam, this is by design. They don't want to have an honest discussion about what does Islam offer. They want to bring Islam or the political Islam under a particular framework, where whenever you talk about Islam, the first question, I mean, we've seen all throughout the last year, during the Gaza campaign itself, every time, whether it's Piers Morgan or any other, Western media personnel, do you condemn what happened on 7th of October? Why? Why is that so? Because, again, it is to enforce every time anything happens in the world itself. Any Muslim, whenever a media person approaches them, the first question would be, do you condemn? Just right now, yesterday, I think so, in Sweden, a person went into an education institution, killed 11 persons. Should I go and ask every one of my Christian colleagues, do you condemn what happened? I mean, in America, mass shooting itself is almost a daily routine.
Yeah, fortunately.
Yeah, I mean, actually, it's more than daily routine, because it sometimes exceeds the number of days in a year have passed, the number of shootings that have occurred. So, do you ever understand, or do you ever have experienced this question being asked from any normal other person in America? Do you condemn what happened in that school or that church or that mosque or that synagogue or that place? No. Then why are Muslims singled out for this particular approach or this behavior? Again, because of vilification campaign. Now, coming to the labeling issue, I mean, this is a strategy that the West has been using. Rather than rejecting an idea based upon the merits and demerits of an idea, it's easier to label a person. And Trump is so effective in labeling people, right? He labels a person. And with a label, he's able to produce a feeling of disgust. Where a person, oh, okay. When he says that when Kamala was running during the election campaign itself, socialist Kamala or the communist Kamala.
Yeah.
By labeling people, you're able to dehumanize them, because there is a certain background that exists. When you call somebody communist, I mean, the whole U.S. population during the Cold Wars was built upon this idea that the only good communist is a dead communist. So you allowed whole populations to be butchered. You allowed whole populations to be starved. You allowed whole populations to be actually, to be ruled under very brutal type of regimes, whether it was in the South America or the Central Americas or in Asia or Africas, just by giving the justification that, okay, these are communist. You allow Pinochet in Argentina to ferry people, up to 30,000 people, take them to the ocean and drop them down using helicopters. Why? Communist. No questions asked. Today was allowed to kill in excess of 45,000 people in Gaza. Israel demolished every standing building, as per Trump, for 2 million people. It's a very small area, 25 miles long. 25 miles in Chicago. You don't understand. Within 25 miles, you don't even leave the city limits. 25 miles is a very small space. And within that small space, Israel demolished, destroyed every building using 2,000-pound bombs. And what is the justification? Oh, we're fighting Hamas. You can label any person Hamas, then you're allowed to kill them. You're allowed to kill their family. You're allowed to do whatever you would like to them. Make them go naked, rape them, detain them for indefinite periods without any trial. Whatever you would like to do. You just label them. You don't need any proof. You don't need anything else. You just label them. You can label anybody as, nowadays they call them terrorists. That's what happened with Dr. Aafia as well. She was labeled. And there are two messages going on with this labeling. First thing, if you want to be safe, protect yourself from being labeled. That's the first message. Protect yourself from being labeled. Okay, how do I do that? I'm supposed to be a good Muslim, right? I'm supposed to obey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I'm supposed to follow the sunnah of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. That's what it means to be a good Muslim. But no, a good Muslim could also mean a political Muslim. A political Muslim could also mean, again, in the terms of the Western media and the Western, again, intellectuals, that a political Muslim is a Muslim that is a terrorist Muslim. For them, there's no distinction between a person who picks up a rifle and a person who doesn't pick up a rifle and only has words and only has ideas. For them, both of them are, again, extremist and violent and whatsoever. So a person who prays 5 times a day could be construed to be a good Muslim. Then maybe I need to be a little bit irregular. Maybe I pray 3 times a day and not 5 times a day. Maybe I know drinking is haram in Islam, but just to prove to my detractors, just to prove to the capitalists so that I can save myself from being labeled a good Muslim, that's what the labeling does. I'm always trying to prove myself that, okay, no, I'm not of this label. I'm not a Muslim of this category. General Musharraf, he was a ruler in Pakistan, and he, on record, on camera, said, look, I'm a normal Muslim. See, now that's where the label comes in. And probably you would have heard this term quite commonly among Muslims. When you talk with somebody, they tell you, I'm a normal Muslim. All right? Yeah. What does it mean to be a normal Muslim? And then he explains himself, Musharraf. He says that, okay, I pray and sometimes I miss prayer. So that's what it means to be normal Muslim. So sometimes you obey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and sometimes you disregard Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So when you actually, kind of play this game between Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and your own nafs and your own hawa and your own desires, sometimes I follow my own desires and sometimes I follow Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I try to keep both of them happy. This is the normal Muslim. This is what they consider to be a normal Muslim. So I want to be within that boat. I want to be within that situation where the colonialist, where the taghut, where the hegemon that is butchering Muslim in the last 20 years or so, left and right, Afghanistan, Iraq, Yemen, Libya, Sudan, Lebanon, Palestine, Pakistan, Burma, the list goes on. Millions of Muslims have been killed. And for what? They keep on talking about the new Middle East, the new Middle East, the new Middle East. And they're forcing the Muslim to select a label for yourself where you're kind of safe from our wrath, So if you are labeled as a good Muslim, then it's a possibility that you might be rejected a visa to any of the Western countries. It's possible that you might be confused with a radical Muslim. It's possible that maybe a drone attack happens upon you because you are a radical Muslim. A label justifies a person being killed with his family. A label. Who labels it? What are the criteria based upon which a person is labeled? I think so. Right now in New York Times, there's an article about how the Israeli army was using AI to select targets and how they relaxed the rules of engagement. That in the past, before the 7 October incident, any attack that would cause a loss of life more than 5 people, unrelated people, okay, labeled person and then his family. So the civilians, if there's a loss of life of more than 5 people, it needs a higher authority to give the green light. They relaxed it down to 20 people, left it down to the individual operatives on the ground to decide, first of all, to label a person. This is the Hamas operative, okay? And before, they only allowed this for higher officials of Hamas. Now, because they said any person that belongs to Hamas, so any person, I don't know what is their definition of belonging to Hamas, because even with respect to the US, when they were saying that they're fighting, Al-Qaeda, it was not only Al-Qaeda, they started saying Al-Qaeda affiliate, Al-Qaeda lookalike, Al-Qaeda sympathizer, Al-Qaeda. So you label them and then you create an association with them, and there is no requirement to bring proof for that association. So imagine Israel dropping 2,000-pound bombs on a place where they think a Hamas operative exists. Maybe it's a water boy that brings in water. And again, assuming that he is a water boy for Hamas and they want to take him out, we're giving the benefit of doubt that, okay, they have come to the right conclusion that this is an operative. And how were they judging how many people are there? Using phone signals. In a place where Trump is saying there's no electricity, where Trump is saying there are no utilities, where Trump is saying that, okay, all infrastructure is demolished, they were using cell phone signals to confirm how many civilians are in a place. And when they come to the conclusion, oh, there is no phone signal, so it means there's nobody there. And they drop a 2,000-pound bomb there. This is how they do it. This is what labeling does. And that's what exactly happened with Dr. Aafia as well. She was labeled to begin with that she is an Al-Qaeda operative. Now, within the American law itself, one of the rights of a U.S. citizen is to be tried by the jury of one's peers, right? And most of the time, I mean, especially nowadays with all of these celebrities and big shot people, even Trump himself. Trump has argued with respect to his cases in New York that they need to be moved out of New York because he cannot find an impartial jury in New York, right?
They all just love him so much,
When it comes down to the Muslims, because again, Muslims are savages, they're not human beings. These rights are for human beings because these are human rights. They're not savage rights. So for human beings, there are human rights. And according to human rights, a person needs to be tried in front of a jury of their peers. And that's one of the things that most of the time, I mean, within the American judicial system, you would see appear again and again and again, especially with very high profile type of cases. We do not have an expectation of an impartial jury because the incident happened in this place. All of the people have formed an opinion, and it's very hard to dissuade them away from whatever opinion they have formed through the media, through their own research and whatsoever. But Dr. Aafia was tried in the U.S. Dr. Aafia was tried in a place where September 11 was, the blame for September 11 was placed upon the whole Muslim population. These Muslims themselves, these Muslims. Even in New York itself, they didn't allow Muslims to build a mosque that it is too close to the place of September 11. They're not differentiating between the person who commits a crime and the general Muslim population. They treat all of the Muslims as one body, one representation. That's where the contradictions you can see with respect to the Western civilization itself comes in. And I think so this needs to sink in, that their view of Muslims is simply as if they're dealing with savages.
This is it reminds me of the ayat from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran, where he says in Surah Baqarah, وَإِذَا قِيلَ لَهُمْ لَا تُفْسِدُوا فِي الْأَرْضِ, that, when said to them, don't cause corruption on this earth, right? And as Dr. Akmal and even Zaki that you mentioned, right, what we're seeing with Trump and what we've seen with Western colonialism in general. That everywhere they've gone, their ideology has caused them to not just cause corruption, but destroy everything for their own benefit. And then Allah says, قَالُوا إِنَّمَا نَحْنُ مُصْلِحُونَ, that they say, we are but reformers. And then Allah replies, أَلَا إِنَّهُمْ هُمُ الْمُفْسِدُونَ, unquestionably it is they who are the corrupters. So, Dr. Akmal was mentioning that the people that are wanting to revive Islam, that are carrying the intellectual message of Islam, that they're simply labeled because they cannot challenge them ideologically.
Yes,
right? And you think
exactly.
about Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam when he first came with the da'wah in Mecca, the same people, the same elites, the ones that had the monopolies, the ones that had the power, the ones that had the wealth, they also knew they couldn't challenge Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam ideologically as well. They knew if they were to compare their ideology of paganism, of kufr, of whatever lifestyle that they had, that they would obviously, they knew this is from Allah Azza wa Jal. They cannot compare, this to what they had to Islam. This is why they resorted to name calling the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam a liar, accusing him of all sorts of things, subjugating the Sahaba, torturing them, putting them through a boycott. So, I mean, it shows that this, we're on the same path. We're going to face the same test. We know that this is the reality because their ideology cannot produce anything at the same level. Jazakallah khair for all those details. Zaki, I don't know if you have anything to add, on the gems that Dr. Akmal shared.
Yeah, no, I mean, Jazakallah khair again, Dr. Akmal. I think the one point that we stress continuously, especially to the youth in the West, is don't be afraid of political Islam. I know especially Hayan can relate to this as well. Growing up in a post 9/11, and especially me, I grew up in New York. You grew up with the name calling to your face. I would get stopped, get on the school bus, getting off, like, oh, there he goes. There's Bin Laden, right? So like this was a reality for us. And, it's funny looking back on these stories now and how they developed our personalities and how they've changed and molded us. But it really shows you that they're so unwilling to face political Islam intellectually that you're absolutely right. They have no choice but to resort to name calling. And this is the simplest thing that's what children do, right? When a 2-year-old and a 3-year-old are fighting, when my 2 sons are fighting, they get in trouble, they start calling each other names. This is what they do. So this is what the colonialists do. They are intellectually incapable. They are handicapped, and they are incapable of even coming to the table and discuss Islam as an ideology with us. So rather, what do? They take innocent Muslims, such as Dr. Aafia, and what do they do with her? They just ostracize her. And anyone in the Muslim community who promotes any concept of political Islam, any concept of unity, any concept of the reservation of the Islamic way of life, oh, he's a radical, don't sit with him, oh, he's not a good influence. But that's where are we drawing the lines? What type of Muslims are we aspiring to be?
Yeah, no, Jazakallah khair, Zaki. I think you hit the nail with the hammer there, because the type of Muslim that we want to be has to come from, as Dr. Akmal was saying, right? It has to be what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has dictated for us. It's not
Exactly.
for the Rand Corporation, it's not for the think tanks here, it's not for the reformists. The way we have to live our lives, it's already decreed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so this is the narrative that exists today and has started to exist post 9/11, right? And this is the world where our sister and Dr. Aafia Siddiqui was kidnapped in, right? But I want to shift a little bit more into her detailed story, right? So she was a sister who was originally from Karachi. She came to the United States for education. She had a full scholarship to the University of Houston. She went to MIT for further education and then graduated from honors there as well. And then she has this PhD in neuroscience, as Dr. Akmal was sharing, from Brandeis University. And she's someone who has not submitted to the Western ideology. She's someone who still is advocating for Islam in an intellectual manner. And so she goes, back to Pakistan. And again, in this post 9/11 world where labeling is free game for anyone, right? She is kidnapped, I believe, on her way to the airport with her 3 children, or with her 2 children, and she was pregnant with the other, right? And subhanAllah, this is not something that's uncommon even, right? This is, Dr. Aafia Siddiqui's case is one that we know about, but there's hundreds, if not thousands of people in Pakistan, outside Pakistan, where anyone who can be labeled as a good Muslim, as an intellectual Muslim, as a political Muslim, has been subjugated through this or worse, right? And so we saw, Dr. Akmal, I don't know if you have more details around this, if you want to share kind of the process, but I think, there is we look at the colonialists and what they have achieved, right, as you mentioned, but I think that the Muslim puppet nations have a large role to play into this, right? And we see that Aafia Siddiqui, she was handed over from Pakistani intelligence to America, right? Her case was silenced. She was disappeared for many, many years with no one knowing where she was. And then you find out that she is prisoner 650 in Bagram in Iraq, and she is tortured to the worst. Afghanistan, sorry, in Afghanistan. She's tortured to the worst conditions that anyone can imagine. And you only hear of this when other people that are also being tortured are able to share something, right?
Yes, exactly. I mean, actually, again, former president of Pakistan, General Musharraf, and he is with his maker now, and he's the best of judge. And he wrote it in his own book, In the Line of Fire, that he actually earned foreign capital by selling these people to the US. He had no remorse. He had no shame for surrendering Muslims to the enemy, to the kuffar.
For money.
And it was not only Dr. Aafia. He actually, as I said, he took it as a business opportunity that he was selling people to the US for that purpose. And the US at that time, they had created black sites, CIA black sites. I mean, anybody can look it up, search it up. And they were taking people all over the places, torturing them, taking confessions from them. And right now, one of the problems that the US has, even though it claims that they have the original planners, the original perpetrators of the September 11 in their custody, whether it is Khalid Sheikh Mohammed or anybody else, but they cannot bring the case to a court because it's tainted by torture, because the defendants, their position is that, okay, we were tortured. So again, it is an ordeal that the Muslim Ummah is still facing right now, and it is going to face, it's going to continuously face. Our masajid, whether it is in Pakistan, whether it is in the US, England, whatsoever, it will always be looked at with a very, very sharp microscope, that, okay, what are they doing? Our elders are going to keep on telling us that, oh, if we don't do this, they're going to label us as extremist. If we don't do this, they're going to label us as radical. If they don't do this, they will keep on telling us. They're going to tell us with respect to our own character, how we need to avoid the labels. Dr. Aafia, I mean, it's such a horrendous tale that one cannot even talk about. We know Abu Ghraib. We know the pictures that came from there, how the prisoners there were tortured, how they were treated, how they were kept, right? Whether it's being naked, whether it's being dogs being let loose upon them, being raped, all other different types of torture that they faced. These were documented using photographs. And Iraq is kind of a modern place when compared with Afghanistan. What happened in Bagram, as you said, it is the other prisoners that came out and related those horrifying stories. And this is the Western civilization that was doing it.
Yeah.
It's so convenient. I remember when the news of Abu Ghraib was broken out, was leaked out, those images were leaked out. So first thing, Rumsfeld, he was a Secretary of Defense, the thing he was furious about that why it was leaked. But then when President Bush talked about it, he said, okay, the action of few should not be generalized to the whole populations. These actions were done by few horrible people. In general, the American population, they're nice people. This is how they deflected blame. This was a government-sponsored, torture campaign being carried out by just labeling people that, okay, these are extremist, radical Muslims, and one way or the other, we need to discover their networks, their structures, and their compatriots whatsoever. And the horrifying story, I mean, even Dr. Aafia, when she was in US jail, she had asked that she does not want any visitors to come to her. Why? Because every time she's brought to the visiting room or visiting chambers whatsoever, cavity search had to be conducted. She had to be stripped down. She had to, allow cavity search. Every time she comes back or she goes to a visiting place, so she had asked that I don't want anybody to visit me. Just let me be. what happened, how many times she was raped, whatsoever in Afghanistan. As I said, it's too horrendous of a story. Rumsfeld is dead. He's with the Maker as well. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the best of revenge takers. But that's
Yes.
where the responsibility of us as an ummah comes in as well. We need to understand, we need to equip ourselves properly with what Islam is, first of all, vis-a-vis these ideologies, whether it is capitalism and socialism. We need to understand exactly how capitalism is suppressing the whole humanity. Not only their own, not only like the people in third world countries in their colonies, but their own people. They are being oppressed. We have to understand how to bring out a solution to them, to the people, whether if we're in the West, for us to be able to articulate how Islam is superior to the ideology that they have, to the creed they have, and to the aqidah they have. We have to be in position right now. I mean, I can understand why Joe Biden did not have the guts to pardon Dr. Aafia, who has been sentenced for 84 years in detention. For what? Snatching a rifle from a soldier?
Yeah. The most unrealistic claim that they could have put.
No, I mean, snatching a rifle from a U.S. soldier in a black site. So that was because she was abducted from Pakistan. The first thing should have been as a question, how did she end up in Afghanistan in U.S. custody? And again, it was a black site. But because she did not, as per the U.S. Constitution, as per the U.S. ideals, she was supposed to be offered a jury of her peers. And that is a contradiction that you see in the Western civilization, because they only consider themselves human beings and nobody else. Everybody else is a savage. They're there to tame the savages. They're there to, one way or the other, reform the savages and make them civilized. We have to understand this, because it's Dr. Aafia today. They will never, it's the eye of the Quran, they will never be satisfied with you till you enter their religion. They will never be satisfied. No matter whatever liberal type of Islam you have, one day or the other, they are going to place a label upon you, not liberal enough. And that is the reality. You know, I mean, Dr. Aafia, as I said, her tale, can you imagine? I mean, her children, when she was abducted, how young they were. I mean, I think
Four and 6 years old.
Yes, eldest son was 6 years old. The younger one was 4 years old, and she was pregnant. And they were kept in detention. And at least in the U.S. itself, when the people illegally crossing the border and when the children are separated from their families, at least they're kept in some kind of a humane way, whether it was Abu Ghraib or Bagram or any other black site that the U.S. operated. These were torture dens. These were not any type of cells of captivity. These were designed to maximize torture. Their size, height, width, everything was designed to torture human beings so that they cannot sleep, they cannot stand, they cannot stretch, they cannot lie straight on their backs. Everything was designed by U.S. doctors, psychologists, to maximize torture. Children were kept there.
And to give a lesson to the people that are not there yet either, right? That they will.
Yes, be aware of this label. Continuously keep on rubbing these labels. Whoever you're facing, you're trying to put a different label in front of them. Oh, no, I'm just a regular Muslim, I'm just a normal Muslim. Now, our elders in our mosques, they're continuously worried about labels. Okay, how the people around us are going to look at us. What we talk, what we dress, how we behave, everything is under a microscope. And our elders, the people running our masajid, they're continuously worried about this issue. How are we going to be labeled? Even though there are people that are on the payroll of FBI and other security agencies that are spying upon the Muslim community. What are they looking for? What are the signs of
one of the things?
Yes, please.
No, I was just going to say, one of the things is that, even as a Muslim who understands this, right? Maybe not at a full scale, understand the political world order. they can maybe understand that the enemy, of course, the Western powers, they will try to do everything that they can to put an end to Islam, right? So this is why they do this, right? But the question comes from them, right? Why is a Muslim nation like Pakistan, right? Or like Syria? And we understand that they are not, maybe the ideal Muslim nation. They're not Islamic nations, according to the Sharia. But why are these nations so invested? Like you said, Musharraf, why is he so invested? And we saw Bashar, and so many other tyrants that have ruled the Muslim world. Why are they so invested in selling these Muslim personalities, these Muslim intellectuals, people that come from different movements that want to revive Islam for their own money? I mean, are they completely, have they forgotten about the akhirah? Are they scared about their own fate, that the Western powers will come to them? I don't know if either of you have a perspective on this, but this is a question that, we get many times when we discuss this with brothers and sisters.
The success of the Western colonialism in the Muslim world and in general, the whole colonized third world itself, was that they were able to create a certain class of people from us that would carry the ideals of the Western civilization, that would actually look up to the Western civilization, that would aspire to be like them. I mean, their only regret is that they have a different skin tone. I mean, like Malcolm X, he called them Oreo cookies. I don't know if you, again, Malcolm X is from a very long time ago, 1965 or so, but at least within the U.S. political culture itself, he still resonates. So he considered some of the, black slaves, African slaves, to be Oreo cookies. They aspired to be like white. Their outer skin is black, but on the inside, they're white. Right? So even at that time in 1965, even though slavery was not there, but he still considered some of the African people, politicians, intellectuals, to be like the Oreo cookies, that they have betrayed their own people, their own constituents, and they're just aspiring to be as white as possible. This is exactly the type of people Bashar is, Musharraf is, Abu al-Fatah Sisi and Muhammad bin Salman and all of these people all across the Muslim world, the Muslim countries, almost 56, 57 countries. These people are continuously worried about their image in Washington, in London, in Paris. They're worried about how the world looks at it. It's not the world. It's only these 3, 4 capitals where they want to appear as if he is the most loyal person to the international order. And that's what their struggle is. That's where the whole effort is continuously. They're trying to prove to their masters, whether it is in London or Washington, that I am your guy. I'm your guy. If you don't support me, because Trump publicly said, he called on the Saudi king and told him, hey, king, if I remove my support, within 2 weeks, your government is going to be gone. This is how they treat us. This is how they treat these rulers. Because, there was a very nice term once coined, AIDS. AIDS is acquired immune deficiency syndrome. And in AIDS, the immune system of a human body cannot defend it against any outside pathogen, right? These people suffer from intellectual AIDS. They can look at the foreign ideas, foreign to Islam ideas, as beneficial, friendly. They don't have a defense mechanism anymore that would protect them against harmful ideas. Anything that comes from the West, they look at it as something good, beneficial. It's from the West. Not the West. These people are very intelligent people. They have made cliches. They have justifications. These are very smart people. These are people, who invented vaccines. These are people who have gone to the moon. These are the people who have created antibiotics. These are very smart people. When they say something, it must be good. Or they're saying that women should be naked. So why are our ladies covering up? We cannot progress without, our people behaving like their people. So they are mesmerized. They are completely surrendered to the Western civilization. They think so that is the only thing that would take the people forward. They have
in our last podcast. Yeah, in our last podcast, we discussed the topic of wahan, as the Prophet ﷺ mentions it, right? And it seems like it's applicable to many of these people, as you're mentioning, the love of the dunya and everything that this in this dunya, right? From a materialistic, capitalistic perspective, and fear of the death, right? But as you mentioned, the death is inevitable, and we see that these people are returning to their lords, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the best of judges. But at the same time, we have an obligation, we have responsibility. As Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, we're the best ummah and we are witnesses over mankind. And because of this, we have, not just for Dr. Aafia Siddiqui, but for all the other people that are oppressed, right? We have a role to play. And I think about the Islamic, in our history is not good just because of, coincidence. No, our history had good times because it was led by Islam. And we see the example of when the Prophet ﷺ, when a single woman, when she was harassed by the Jewish tribe, Banu Qaynuqa, when her dress was lifted up, the Prophet ﷺ, in response, after some Muslim took an action in defense for her, he sent a whole army, right, just for the sake of one single woman. And then we saw later on in our history Al-Mu'tasim, when the Khalifa, when he heard that one woman is calling for his name, that where is Mu'tasim the Khalifa when she has been arrested or harassed or captured by the Romans, and he sends an army so big that the tail of the army is still leaving the capital of the Khilafah by the time this army reaches the Roman city where she was being captured. And this is, again, you have to imagine, we had thousands and thousands of, the state was so large at this time, right? We had thousands of Muslims, and for the sake of one Muslim, an army moved. And today we're an even bigger ummah. The ummah has gotten bigger and bigger. And we're beyond one Muslim. It's not just one Dr. Aafia Siddiqui today, it's thousands of them spread all throughout the Muslim world.
Yes.
And we have, as an ummah, failed them, right? Because we're not moving. As a leadership, we are not moving. We're not using our resources. We're not using our resources and tools that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has commanded us to use. When we have them, we have the capability. It's the fact that, like you said, our leadership has not taken Islam as the intellectual leadership. They have taken the capitalistic version or any other version, as a matter of fact.
Exactly. I mean, actually, we have lost our sense of righteousness. It was this sense of righteousness, it was this sense of superiority. And this is a positive thing, that we are the last ummah. We are the people who have the last message from the Creator, from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this message is to rescue all of humanity. When the Persian Emperor Rustam, he asked for an ambassador from the Muslims, Rubayya bin Amir radhiyallahu ta'ala anhu, he went. And he asked, Rustam asked, okay, what brought you out? I mean, if you need something, I can give you beyond your imaginations. If you're lacking cereal, wheat, rice, whatsoever, animals, camels, horses, cows, whatever you desire, we would give you beyond your imagination. That was a huge empire, I mean, the Persian Empire. And what was the response of Rubayya bin Amir radhiyallahu ta'ala anhu? He said that Allah has delivered us to liberate mankind from the slavery of man to the worship of one Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, from the narrowness of this world to the vastness of the akhirah. Now we've lost this sense of righteousness, and this sense of righteousness towards other human beings. If we had kept it, we would have actually had a stronger sense of righteousness for our own. A system is judged not by how the strongest is treated. The strength of a system is judged by how the weakest is treated or is dealt with. And Abu Bakr radhiyallahu ta'ala anhu, when he became the caliph, and his first khutbah is very short. And he said that, okay, after a little bit of intro, and he said, the strongest among you who is found to be weak and taken advantage of. Why? Because I would stand next to him till he receives his right. And the weakest amongst you is the one who thinks he is strong, and because of his strength he wronged somebody. It is because I would stand till the moment he returns what is not rightfully his. Whether it is Dr. Aafia, or like you mentioned, the story of Mu'tasim Billah, and the same thing is what was there when Muhammad bin Qasim came to Sindh, or when Mahmud al-Ghaznavi, when he came to Somanat. These are the realities. We had a sense of righteousness. We had a sense of honor and dignity. That sense of honor and dignity was not that because one of the highest officials in a state is being disrespected. No, it is when a single Muslim is being disrespected, the whole ummah, the whole, the state structure would feel enraged. How dare they?
Mhm.
Now, this is a sense that Islam gives us, because Rasulullah ﷺ said, a Muslim is a brother to a Muslim. He doesn't oppress him. He doesn't surrender him to an oppressor. And this is what Rasulullah ﷺ said. Rasulullah said, a Muslim is a brother to a Muslim. When he is called upon for help, he responds. This is the right of another Muslim. And the Quran says, وَمَا لَمْ لَا تُقَاتِلُونَ فِي سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ وَالْمُسْتَضْعَفِينَ مِنَ الرِّجَالِ وَالنِّسَاءِ وَالْوِلْدَانِ. What is wrong with you that you don't fight for the people, for the men, women, and children that have been oppressed because they're weak? So we have kind of lost our own as an ummah. Now, the problem is our resources are divided in 56 different small little entities. Whether it is whether it is our wealth, whether it is our armies, whether it is our political clout, it's divided. And they have been beholden, right? They're encaged within nation-state constructs. Now, in a nation-state, you're only allowed to act, again, allowed, by the international order, in your own defense only. So when the French government officially, I'm not talking about Charlie Hebdo or any magazine, when the French government itself disrespected Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam by displaying disrespectful caricatures on government buildings, not a single Muslim government in these 56 Muslim countries responded. Not a single one. Why? Because Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam belongs to all of the Muslims. Nobody can claim that this is my national interest. I mean, we're talking about Dr. Aafia right now. Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, his person, Rasulullah said, you cannot believe until you love me more than you love yourself. Today, our honor, our women, they're not safe. Our aqidah is not safe. Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam on the official level is being disrespected. And these governments cannot respond. They cannot. I'm not saying they do not. They cannot respond because of the nation-state construct, because of the nation-state theory. They cannot respond. It's not the national interest. And we have to, these are the points that should force us to think, to reflect that, okay, such a powerful ummah, 2 billion strong, why cannot it respond to its interest? Why cannot it defend its own interest? Why cannot it respond to threats to its interest?
I think this is the main key right here that you mentioned, Dr. Akmal, because as I mentioned, what I started with, right, recently, right before Biden went out, we saw this surge for or push to get the pardon for Dr. Aafia Siddiqui, and millions of people were signing a petition, right? And I think the petition reached over 2 million signees. And still people have this thought, right? Why, if millions of Muslims are calling for her freedom, why is she not being allowed to be free? If millions of Muslims around the world are asking for the occupation to be removed in Gaza, if millions of people are asking that the massacres and the genocide stop, why does it not happen? And not just this, right? But then you have armies, you have land resources.
I presented this argument in this way because people still think, they still have hope. They still think that Western civilization itself represents some kind of, some kind of moralities. That hope itself is deceiving. We need to understand this. The West itself is built upon only protecting its own interest. It would take as much as possible from the world without any type of sense of responsibility that, okay, I need to give back to the world that I'm trying to rob. You have to understand this. I mean, the problem here is not that 2 million people signed a petition for Dr. Aafia's release. I mean, my problem is, why was there hope that they would respond to it?
Exactly.
I mean, these are the people that actually cause famines. Madeleine Albright, she was a Secretary of State during Clinton's time, and she was asked on camera that because of the US sanctions upon Iraq, 500,000 babies have died because of lack of access to baby formula milk. And she was asked this question, is it worth it? And she blatantly said, yes. Imagine people that do not have the kindness in their hearts for 500,000 babies starving to death. And we're thinking that they are going to show some kind of mercy or some kind of kindness to a person that they have judged to be a terrorist. I mean, I would say labeled a terrorist. So, I mean, my problem is there. My problem is there. I mean, we should try our best, whatever relief that could be brought forward. And right now, there's slight hope from the people of the West. Okay, the governments are separate. People are different. The people, they saw the oppression in Gaza. And the people in the West responded to the calls of Gaza, rather than the Muslims, rulers, the Muslim governments, the Muslim armies in the Muslim lands. The people, non-Muslim people in the Western countries, whether America or Europe, they found it really hard to digest what was happening in Gaza. And maybe that is the only thing where a slight hope could exist. But that would require, again, from us to be able to articulate our opinion based upon Islam. What does Islam stand for? And why would anybody that stands for such a strong argument be vilified? And that's the only hope. Thinking about any U.S. administration, you can imagine the most liberal person within the U.S. political landscape. I do not think they would have the balls, they would have the courage to pardon somebody that had been labeled terrorist.
Jazakallah khair, Dr. Ahmad. We all appreciate the vast level of information. Zaki, do you have any concluding thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, to Dr. Akmal's point as well, when we were preparing for this podcast, it's a little bit different preparing for this as preparing for a different concept or a different idea, because this is just one of those topics that's genuinely so depressing. It's one of those things that the more you read about it, the more you go back and you study it, it reminds you of how much we as an ummah have failed. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when He tells us in the Quran, Amr bil Ma'ruf, right? Enjoin in the good. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling us that you are the best ummah, go enjoin in good, forbid evil. It's like, where are our priorities? And of course, we look to the leadership of the Muslim Ummah and we hold them accountable. Hayam, to your question, where are the Muslim leaders, right? Where are the leaders of the Muslim Ummah who have propagated themselves in these positions of leadership, and they're chasing after this dunya, they're going after money and plots, and they want to appease to the West? But do they not think for even a moment that the day will come when they will have to face Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Do they think that they will be spared? Do they not know when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, كُلُّ نَفْسٍ ذَائِقَةُ الْمَوْتِ, that every soul shall taste death? Do they not know that the death that they inflicted on the millions of Muslims from Iraq to Afghanistan, from Gaza to Kashmir, around the world, the cries, the screams of the Muslim women and children, do they not know that their death will not be fine? It will not taste like the death of a believer. It will not be a death that will bring pleasure to them, but rather it will be a death. And as we say, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the best of rulers. He's the best of judges. And He will deal with these corrupt rulers accordingly. And all we can ask in this time, and all we can remember when we talk about Amr bil Ma'ruf wa Nahy anil Munkar, is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is with us. Regardless of what happens, regardless of how they label us, regardless of how they oppose us and how they ostracize us, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will never take the side of injustice. He subhanahu wa ta'ala will never take the side of zulm, of fahisha, of fitna, but rather He is with the believers. He subhanahu wa ta'ala, His victory, His support is with those who are fighting the good fight, who are enjoining the good and forbidding the evil, and following the sunnah of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. So as Muslims youth, this is my projection, my call to the youth in the West, that we need to remember our responsibilities. And believe me, I know it's very, very easy in the West to get sidetracked and forget that we have obligations, we have responsibilities to the greater Muslim Ummah at large, especially since we are in the West, a place where I say we're put on a podium compared to the other world. The content, the media, the vocabulary, the speeches that come out of the West, they are heightened at a different level. And so we need to utilize and leverage these platforms in a way that can resume the Islamic way of life, in a way that will revitalize the Ummah's perception of Islam and the world at large. And it is only through with the help of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and by being steadfast upon this mission that we will find success in this life and the next.
Yeah, I think one of the points that you just mentioned at the beginning, right? That when you look at the stories of Sister Dr. Aafia Siddiqui and others, if you look at Gaza, it's very easy to become depressed. And when a person, they don't have the right understanding of how to perceive this information, they may go in isolation and start even looking at the news, right? What's happening to the Muslim Ummah? What is our history like? What is the situation in Bangladesh, the forced famines, the forced floods, the situation in Pakistan, so on and so forth, right? But the reality of the believer is that we should learn about it, but it should motivate us even more. It should motivate us even more to do more, right? As you said, to enjoying the good, to do it even more, to understand that this is, our ummah. As Dr. Akmal was saying, the believers, al-mu'minu miratu mu'min, that the believer is a mirror for another believer, right? So you have these understandings, and I mean, it's a long journey, inshallah, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will hold us accountable for not the results, but our actions in that process, right? And this is the glad tidings that the earliest Sahaba, like Sumayya radiallahu anha, and Ali Yasir, and Khabbab, and Bilal radiallahu anhum, people that were being tortured in the beginning for their call for Islam, for their submission to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that they were faced with, right? So, we understand that challenges will be many on the way. But we ask all the Muslims, ask all the people that are listening to this, that any oppression that you see, any situation in the Ummah where you feel that there is injustice, we have an obligation to stand up with them. We have an obligation to not just, bring attention to it, but as Dr. Akmal was sharing, to be able to work towards a solution that eradicates all of this systemically. So inshallah. Jazakallah khair, both of you, Dr. Akmal and Zaki. I don't know, Dr. Akmal, do you have any? Yeah, go ahead.
Yes, there's kind of a dream attributed to Dr. Aafia, and I think so it's important to bring it here because it would relate with what Zaki exactly said as well. Dr. Aafia, she was visited by Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and Isa alayhi salam in her dream to comfort her. An individual, when distressed, facing a challenge, his responsibility is to be patient. And if they're patient, they're successful in the sight of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I mean, you can see the magicians when they face torture in front of the Pharaoh, or you can see the story of Ashab al-Ukhdud that is mentioned in the tafsir of Surah Al-Baruj, being killed when standing up for haqq, being tortured when standing up for haqq. This is something that it would actually, I would say, in the sight of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has the greatest honor, the greatest reward. Because Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, the Sayyidu Shuhada is Hamza radhiyallahu anhu, and the person who stood up to a tyrant, said the word of haqq and was killed for it. So maybe Aafia, she is going through a very, very harsh reality, but it's not her test. She's patient. The test is ours. How we are helping her. And each one of us has its own capacity. I can talk. A person that has an organization, a party, can mobilize people. An army officer, he has weapons. He has people under his command that are ready to lay down their lives under his orders, right? Each one going to be asked about with respect to his capacity. What did they do when a Muslim is being oppressed? Okay, so if a person, individual person, okay, you might be a student, you might be, a family member, you might be a person from the community. At most you can do is talk. But the person who has militaries under their command, their responsibility is to remove these clutches, to remove these cages, to remove these barriers, to remove, all of these impediments that have kind of become instrumental in suppressing Islam and Muslims rather than being something that helps Islam and Muslims. They need to recognize that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, has taken steps to comfort Bibi Aafia in her ordeal right now.
Yeah.
But what about the people that are failing towards their responsibility in this situation? Can you imagine? I mean, Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and Isa alayhi salatu wasalam being the people that stand against us, as witnesses that this was my daughter. She was being oppressed in such and such way, and the Muslim Ummah that was 2 billion strong did not come to her aid, did not rescue her. Our rulers cannot even take her name. Imran Khan came to came to the US, met Trump. He was quite boastful in Pakistan. His followers were quite boastful about him that he's going to do this and that. And he did not even bring up the name of Dr. Aafia. I mean, you're talking about they being afraid. They cannot even name her. And that's the question that we should be worried about. That when Dr. Aafia is going to plead to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala,
And the day of ultimate judgment.
Exactly. When the Muslims of Gaza, the children of Gaza, when the women of Gaza, when they would raise this question, that we were abandoned, we called for help, and nobody answered. I mean, that's the question that should occupy our minds, that should actually kind of worry us the most.
Jazakallah khair, Dr. Akmal. Very good and powerful ending. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala use us for his deen, allow the oppression to be removed.
Ameen.
We obviously pray for Dr. Aafia Siddiqui and the rest of the Muslims
Yes.
that have been oppressed. And at the same time, I remind the brothers, as Dr. Akmal said, when we have Islamic leadership, people like Dr. Aafia Siddiqui will be the first ones to be freed. Inshallah, much sooner. But in the moment the Islamic leadership comes to the top, wherever we see Muslim sisters and brothers that have been oppressed, inshallah, from day one, they will be brought to the honor that they deserve, inshallah. Jazakallah khair, brothers and sisters, for your time. Inshallah, we ask you to share this episode with your families and friends. Leave us a comment. Tell us how we can improve. And we look forward to seeing you on the next episode. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Assalamu alaikum.